And we're back. You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. And don't forget about checking out our website, www.billycboxing.com, for all the latest boxing news and other stuff. And right now, it's time for the
Blast from the Past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Top-ranking Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time. Look at that left hook.
Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past, which is being brought to us by KOFantasyBoxing.com. Check that out, KOFantasyBoxing.com. Features former world champion and boxing Hall of Famer Wilfredo the Bazooka Gomez. And joining me right now to tell us all about the Bazooka is my man Alex Pierpaoli. What's up, my man?
Good evening, Billy C. How are you doing?
Better than the stream, apparently, So, but the show must go on.
It's very odd to sort of call in just with no, not hearing any of the show.
Back in the day, you used to. Remember? Didn't you? Oh, I thought
it's always been live.
Really? I thought when you first started doing the Blast from the Past segment, it was similar to that. But
maybe. I don't remember. It was July of 2010, so it's been a while now.
Yeah. Time is flying. I was just, I've been putting some on the premium podcast. I've been putting some of the older things out. People had asked me about the differences with the shows that we're doing now compared to like the different shows that we did. We did a morning show, we did a weekly show, we did a daily show. And I've been throwing up some of the morning shows, and I've been getting a lot of positive feedback. Everybody likes that style that we did. It was like a morning drive type of a show. It was a lot of comedy and stuff. It was good, all boxing still. But,
you and Jeremy, you guys did have a good chemistry. They were funny.
Yeah. So I've been putting some of those up on the premium. But anyway, tell us about Wilfredo Gomez.
All right, Billy C. Well, Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez. A bazooka is, Bert Sugar. This guy is in Bert Sugar's book, and Bert Sugar does take a little time to explain a bazooka. Bert has him at ranked number 89 in boxing's greatest fighters, and I think that is a good way to start with him because it is sort of it's an equalizer type of a weapon. It's an anti-tank type weapon. Small groups of soldiers with one guy with a bazooka could sort of punch holes in an enemy's armor and sort of move in and get good position. Because they would sort of fall in behind the damage that thing could do. And that's really the way Wilfredo Gomez fought. I mean, this was a guy who not only was a pressuring guy, but he had a lot of power in a sort of short-range type of puncher. He was 5'5" tall, fought at super bantamweight and at featherweight. And I think, unfortunately, that his reign at super bantamweight is sort of what hurts him in terms of the all-time rankings because it was a junior title or, like a junior featherweight title because I noticed he's not ranked in one of the all-time lists for either bantam or feather on Ibro, and I think that maybe because he spent so much time dominating a junior division. But he was born October 29th, 1956, in Los Monjas, Puerto Rico, which is was an extremely poor suburb, and he started boxing at around 8 years old, and if not for boxing, he probably was. You never would have heard of him. He seemed at one point they described him as a stocky kid with an afro who didn't seem destined for anything until you saw him fight.
This guy, his first 40 fights, all ended before the allocated distance. Which is another reason why I guess they decided Bazooka was a fitting nickname for this guy, and this is one of the things about Gomez, and I know he's in the Bert Sugar book, but again, this is something that I know that you've become familiar with a lot of the younger fans and some of the interaction that we have in the chat rooms and some of the comments you hear on this show from them and stuff like that. And, it's like they don't even recognize guys like Wilfredo Gomez as being great, and when you think of these fighters that did what he did, I mean, when you look, we always say the same thing when you do the blast, but it's so true. Even him who fought, in the 80s, the late 70s and through the 80s, I mean, all the big names in these weight classes during that era fought Gomez. Carlos Zarate, he lost to Salvador Sanchez, but he still fought him. Lupe Pintor, Juan Laporte, Rocky Lockridge, who was a champion. He won that fight. He fought Azuma Nelson. I mean, all the big names, Alfredo Lane. I mean, all of the big names he fought.
Yeah, he sure did, and I mean that was he definitely when people talk about the ages-old war between fighters of Mexican heritage versus fighters of Puerto Rican heritage. Wilfredo Gomez was really on the front lines of that. Some of his greatest fights and most memorable fights were against great Mexican fighters, and it only seems fitting that we and maybe this is why you chose this today was because we do have a Puerto Rican in the main event, the big fight coming up this week. I don't think Cotto has ever come close to the greatness of Gomez. In a lot of ways, Gomez is sort of the standard other great Puerto Ricans have been measured against. I would say that Tito Trinidad's greatness was certainly measured against Gomez, and they were similar in a sense because you're right. That was what was amazing of him is that he in his very first fight he had a draw, and but then he didn't. He just had straight knockouts, and included. He had straight knockouts, I think 37 of them total, and it was not until he lost to
Sanchez.
Salvador Sanchez that he had that a fight ended any other way than him standing over the guy. He stopped everybody, including the great Carlos Zarate. The Lupe Pintor fight actually came after Sanchez, but yeah, that was one of the things about that. Once he won the junior featherweight title, he had 17 straight defenses. Bill, he won every single one of them by knockout.
I know. I mean, he only won 2 fights of his whole career. Out of 44 wins, only 2 were won by decision. And one of them was a 12-round decision title fight against Juan Laporte, and the other one was a 15-round majority decision win over Rocky Lockridge. Everyone else, the fight ended by knockout. Either he knocked him out or, unfortunately, he got knocked out. All 3 of his losses were knockout stoppages. But that just explains the type of fighter he was. If there was ever a guy that matches up to, seek and destroy, kill or be killed, it was Wilfredo Gomez.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was something that, especially towards the end of his career, when he probably was fighting, maybe when he should not have been, that was something that was, between him and one of his trainers that, they said to him, I'm getting worried about you, and he said, no, don't you ever stop a fight with me. If I die in the ring, so be it. That was his mindset. That was one thing that even Bert Sugar goes away to describe about that. Sometimes the blows might land behind the head, and sometimes maybe they're a little on the waistband. But Tito had that issue as well. If you watch the Carlos Zarate knockout, it is absolutely brutal. He drops him 2 times in round 4, and then the round is over, but the crowd is going so crazy, and he is like a man possessed. He drops him again after the bell, and then the next round he puts him down again, and there's one point where Zarate sort of crumples into the ropes that I think should have been a knockdown. The ref didn't call it. Bazooka keeps coming, and Zarate's cornerman basically almost climbs into the ring to get between them because the ref is like, not stopping it quick enough as if to say, look, somebody's got to save Zarate here.
Right.
So yeah, he could be a very, very vicious fighter, and it just made for absolutely thrilling fights. One of the names on his record actually too is a relative. He was a cousin. Ruben Valdez was a cousin of Rodrigo Valdez. I wanted to mention that.
You know, you mentioned, you know, when he lost to, when he got knocked out, well, you didn't mention the Zuma Nelson fight, but that's when maybe he started to decline a little bit. He got knocked out by Zuma Nelson, came back and really had a tough fight against Rocky Lockridge, went 15 rounds and squeaked out a win there. Then he got knocked out in 9 rounds by Alfredo Lane, and everybody pretty much was saying that his career was over. He proved them wrong with his win over Mario Gonzalez, which he stopped in 6 rounds in Florida. But then he retired, and a year went by, and he decided that he was going to come out of retirement, and he came back almost a year to the day and fought Mario Salazar, and stopped him in 2 rounds. But he knew that he was not the same, and that he felt that he could not compete at a world-class level, and retired for good and never came back, which, you know, normally, and I don't understand why it's not like that. I know he's a hero in Puerto Rico, and we'll get to that in a minute, but, you know, as far as here, it seems like he's forgotten almost already, and that kind of thing bothers me. I mean, it's one thing when we're talking about a guy from the 1920s, you know, and we have to deal with the young fans saying, well, if I can't watch video or if I can't judge him for myself, I'm not going to give him credit. I'm not going to read the, you know, all 1,000 accounts that say the same thing. I'm not going to believe it unless I can see it. Here's a guy that fought definitely in the technical age where you can watch plenty of video of him, good quality video in the 80s, late 80s, and yet he's almost forgotten.
Yeah, it is sad, and the good thing about a guy like this is a lot of his greatest fights are on YouTube, so he is accessible to today's fans. But you're right. I mean, I think, you know, maybe part of that is something that really did haunt him and really took a lot of the joy of the sport, at least for a little while, out of his life, was that the death of Salvador Sanchez. I mean, they had an absolutely spectacular fight together, and then because he lost, he was absolutely devastated. He went into hiding. He didn't even want to be seen. He really carried the shame, not only of his own for himself of having been beaten, but because he felt like such a national hero, he felt like he had shamed his nation, which of course, you know, is not true. I mean, these guys are athletes, and you know, the better man won that night, and it was, you know, one of the greatest fighters of the era. And the saddest thing that occurred, of course, was Sanchez had that horrible car accident in 1982, so there never could be a rematch. So that was something that really did upset him, because he had been using that idea of I'm going to avenge myself upon Salvador Sanchez. So when Sanchez died, so did the hopes of revenge, and you know what, for him. And I think a lot of fighters would feel, especially somebody who had been unbeaten for so long, was when Sanchez died, so did this shot at like a career redemption. But unfortunately, you know, for him, so I think if there had been 2 Sanchez fights, maybe more people would remember. But the one fight that they had was spectacular. And he went on to have other great fights. I mean, the fight against Lupe Pintor is another thrilling match, and that actually was on the undercard of Hearns Benitez, and it stole the show from the main event.
You know, it's funny that he may have thought that about, you know, redemption against Salvador Sanchez. I mean, let's look at the facts. The facts are it was the first loss of his career. The facts are that it was the first time that his fight didn't end with him knocking out an opponent, with the exception of his pro debut, which was a draw. The other real important fact is that he was fighting in a bigger weight class. He had been fighting all those previous years in the weight class below it. As a matter of fact, after the Salvador Sanchez fight, he ended up going back down in weight. It wasn't until the Juan Laporte fight that he fought for a featherweight world title and actually won at that point. So, I mean, really, from a realistic point of view, there should be no thought of redemption or shame or anything, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. But I think that's the thing about these guys that makes fighters is that, they see things in a more extreme view. And I think that he couldn't, to some degree, he never got past that to some level. And I think the other thing that there's a really good documentary. It's in Spanish, but it does have English subtitles. It's on YouTube. I will post the link in social media for the show. But it talks about some of the people, Bill, this is a common story. We get this so much. He was generous to a fault. So he was giving away cars, giving away things to the people around him. He had a relationship with one of his attorneys where, they started partying together. And that was sort of one of the things, drugs were involved. It seems like cocaine. And as a child, growing up, he was never involved in anything like that. As a matter of fact, in his youth, he said, I didn't have any vices. I didn't know what alcohol was. But see, as a kid, he liked music, he liked reading and philosophy. But as, once he was famous, everybody wants to party with the champ. So that got to his head a little bit. The other thing was that he had a lot of trouble making weight. So, and that was definitely the case with Sanchez. There was also some partying before that. He claims he only trained about 25 days going into that Sanchez fight. So after that, some of those other fights afterwards, like the Nelson fight, the Juan Laporte fight, there would be times where some of those camps weren't all that great because of partying. But he did, like so many fighters, really, really take a lot out of himself trying to make weight.
Well, geez, the 80s, I mean, it was tough not to get wrapped up in the party scene, that's for sure, especially if you had a bunch of money and stuff. So I could definitely see that. And as a matter of fact, I know I could see that. But
those were the Studio 54 days.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, there was a line, I believe, I think it might have been in Scarface, there's nothing like excess. And the 80s at one time were defined, the era of excess, and that's pretty much what it was, especially when it came to partying, But Wilfredo Gomez is, from what I understand, working with youth today. As a matter of fact, one of our listeners who requested this, my man Angel from Madison, Wisconsin, I believe, is the one. If I'm remembering incorrectly, I apologize. But I think he said that he's doing well, and that people look up to him in Puerto Rico. I just wonder if I wish that more people here in the States and just overall would remember him, especially some of the younger fans. Alex, I don't understand. I mean, like me, I love going back in time and learning and brushing up on fighters that aren't fighting anymore. It seems like a lot of the younger fans don't give two craps. All they care about is who's in front of them right now.
Yeah, and that's too bad too, because this is a guy who, because he's from a TV age, there is video of him, and it's almost like watching video of the NBA from the 70s and 80s. It's almost like, I don't know, there's a quality about them. They just seem, maybe it's just the graininess of the footage, but they just seem like there's something tougher or hardier about them. One thing's for sure, there absolutely is when it comes to Gomez. He was a 15-round fighter. So I'm sorry, one of my friends recently put it pretty plainly, too, when we were discussing Floyd Mayweather's greatness, that, just off the bat, if you're talking about a fighter who never fought 15-rounders, that's something you should take into consideration when comparing him against the greatness of other fighters who routinely fought 15-rounders. And Gomez is from that era. And that's one of the things. Oh, that's one of the things I wanted to mention. That some of his wins, of course, there was controversy, and the Lupe Pintor one was a good one. This has been a rule change that happened since then, I believe. I'm not sure if it was because of this fight or because of other fights, but this was one of them. But after the 12th round in the fight with Lupe Pintor, the round is absolutely brutal. It was one of the best rounds of the year. Pintor's cornermen, Gomez's cornermen, they knew he was exhausted. He had gone through so much that day to make the weight. They didn't think he was going to be able to finish this fight. So one of the things that one of the handlers said, look, after the round, run out there and get him so he doesn't have to walk back to the corner. And Bill, go ahead and watch that video. It's crazy. His trainer runs all the way across the ring, lifts him up, and carries him to the stool. Now, evidently he did it after 2 rounds, and, there was no point deductions or anything, but I don't think you'd get away with that today, maybe in Texas.
Yeah, in Texas, what do you tell me? If Lawrence Cole is there, he'll help you up, give you a sip of water, and that's all during the round. He'll make the other guy go in the neutral corner. But it's funny you say that because I remember watching several old black and white fights. I can't remember who all of a sudden, but I remember trainers carrying their fighters back. And when you could be saved by the bell, in any round. If a guy gets knocked down and the bell rings, they'd drag him right back to the corner. That was more commonplace for sure. But anyway, do you have any updates on what he's doing right now, aside from what I had said about working with some Utes?
He did have some health problems. I noticed he had. There was an article in ESPN that he had. Real severe pneumonia. It looks like I think it was 2012 or 2013. But last year he was at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He's a routine guest there. I wanted to check, and I'm trying to do it right now quickly, because they have been posting who is coming this year, and I wanted to see if he might be one of them, if they've already announced it. But he is a routine guest there.
Yeah, well.
And sometimes, he'll do a little ringside lecture, him and Juan Laporte, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, Juan's a character, that's for sure. Who'd you put him in against?
I put him in against 3 different guys, and I think just saying the names, I think you'll know who he matched up best with. I put him in against Gary Russell Jr., Nicholas Walters, and Guillermo Rigondeaux.
Wow, they're 3 tough guys. All top fighters in the division today. How did he fare?
Now, against Gary Russell Jr., he beat him. The first time they went head-to-head, he beat him by unanimous decision. Scores were 118 to 109, 117 to 110, and 115 to 112. So he really dominated him. And then over when they fought 100 times, he did get the best of Russell. He won 53. Russell won 39. They drew 8 times, and he was able to stop Gary Russell Jr. 29 times. Now, against Rigondeaux, the first time they fought, he stopped Rigondeaux. He stopped him in the 11th, TKO. When they fight 100 times, this didn't really surprise me because Rigondeaux is an exceptional boxer. And even though Gomez, could box, he was more of a puncher. There was time, that was one of the things that was interesting about Zarate is they figured, well, we're going to outbox this guy. Well, he could still slug going backwards. So Rigondeaux, a fight with him, it's not going to be a walk in the park, but he did dominate him over 100 fights. Gomez only wins 34. Rigondeaux wins 63. They have 3 draws, and he was able to stop Rigondeaux 26 times. Now, of course, the best fight would be against Nicholas Walters because they're both very similar. I got to think that Walters maybe hits a little harder punch for punch, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe, because Walters' career, we haven't seen enough of it yet, but he certainly doesn't have the KO streak that that Gomez had. The first time they fought, it was a really close fight. Gomez wins it. There was 2 knockdowns. There was only 1 knockdown. Gomez scored it in the 10th. Gomez wins a majority decision, 2 scores of 114 to 113 and 118 to 109, and 1 score even at 114 to 114. And when they fight 100 times, Bill, this is pretty cool. This is the closest one I think I've ever seen. 48 wins, 48 losses, 4 draws, and Gomez stopped Walters 37 times. So they really, they are pretty well matched.
You can't get any closer than that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get any closer than that. Interesting. It's interesting to see that the Axeman has such a high rating already, and especially going up against Bazooka Gomez. But great job as usual. Wilfredo Gomez, 44 wins, 42 coming by knockout. He only had 3 losses in which he was stopped all 3 times. Alex and I talked about those. He did have 1 draw. He was a former world super bantamweight, featherweight, and super featherweight world champion. He is still with us at 59 years old, 265 rounds as a pro with an 88% knockout ratio. Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez, our blast from the past this week. And Alex, great job as usual. And you